Well, hello 1020 friends. And so this is my week 15 video, the final exam review sheet. And there are two of them this week. The other one is the video on the final exam practice run. So make sure that you watch both of these so that you have some preparation for the final as much as is possible. So if you want to follow along with me, you'll click on content and then look for final exam materials in the left-hand sidebar and click on final exam review sheet. So students will need to take the final exam before 11:59 p.m. on Monday, May 2nd. And so the final exam will be open only from 8 o'clock a.m. until 11:59 p.m. on Monday the 2nd. And if you have not taken it by 11:59 p.m., then you receive a 0. So you want to make sure you get your exam in on time, as instructors have very firm deadlines that we must meet. So exams aren't accepted late. That's just generally the rule of thumb, unless you can provide documented evidence of a real emergency, and even then it's challenging. So make sure you get it in on time. So the final exam for English 1020 consists of a very short story or an excerpt maybe from a somewhat longer story that you will be asked to read. And the story, the excerpt chosen, as I say, generally it's not a very long one. And then there will be a prompt question. So your job will be to write a paragraph in response to that prompt question after reading through the story carefully. And notice that the English department always gives a common English 1020 final exam to all 1020 students across the board. So I am not the one who writes the final exam, rather, that comes from the department. Note that you may use your little Siegel handbook as you're writing. You can also look up any words from the short story or the excerpt that you don't understand. I encourage you, if there are any footnotes, sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't, read those. They'll be helpful to you in understanding wording that you may not be familiar with. So the final exam for 1020, just like 1010, is always administered cold. And what that means is students do not see the actual text that they're writing about or the prompt question that directs that writing until they actually log in to take the final exam. But we will, of course, spend review time this week looking at a past 1020 final exam text and prompt, which is what we're doing in that little practice run activity. And I very strongly encourage you to try your hand at actually writing a response to that practice text. So, make sure you watch the other video this week. Go to content, final exam materials, and practice run to locate the sample text. And in that separate video, I'll be discussing the practice run sample exam. So again, be sure you watch that video, as the information in it is going to be really critical and helpful to your success on the real final exam, just as the information here is also critical to your success. And note that the week 15 discussion board posting is actually your submission of that practice run. So you should submit it before Wednesday night the 27th at 11:59 p.m. in order to be able to receive feedback from me that will help you do better on the real final exam. And then, of course, obviously, the practice run submission counts as your week 15 discussion board grade. So here are some specifics that I can tell you about the final exam up front. Obviously, you're going to double space your paper. You're typing in Times New Roman 12-point font. You'll use a standard heading and MLA formatting at the top of your paper on the left as follows. So your name, my name, the course name, and the date, done in correct MLA formatting, 2 May 2022. No commas there. If you do continue your short paragraph into a second page, place your last name and page number in the upper right-hand corner. And then you want to include a brief title centered in the middle of the page just after that initial formal heading on page 1. Your title doesn't have to be fancy. It can just simply state the purpose of the paper, a character analysis, or whatever the purpose turns out to be. So this next item is something that you really want to get into your head. Treat this paragraph like a body paragraph in a paper. So for example, you're not going to think of this paragraph like an introductory paragraph. You don't need an introductory paragraph. There will be no hook. There will be no introductory information, right? Like we normally have with a hook. But you'll just start out with a topic sentence, and in that first topic sentence, you must include the author's name and the title of the piece that you'll be writing about, correctly punctuated. And since it's probably going to be a short story, and since we know that shorter works, the titles are always placed in quotation marks, not italics, then you'll know that that's what you need to do, even if the department tries to trip you up by putting the title in italics. Remember, these are short stories, so the titles are going to be placed in quotation marks. So think of that first sentence in this little response paragraph that you'll be writing for the final exam, the topic sentence, almost like a mini thesis. And so as stated above, you have to include the author's name and the title of the text in this first sentence. But you should also answer the prompt question in this first sentence as well. And the best way to do it is to regurgitate, a fancy-smancy word that means to vomit back up, the question in the form of a statement. And this is a good little technique to use anytime you have a prompt situation. So here's an example. Let's say the prompt question is as follows. Read the short story below entitled A Day in the Life of Joe Smith by Sam Brown, and then in a well-developed paragraph, describe 2 character traits of Joe Smith. So let's imagine that after reading the short story about Joe Smith, you're realizing that he seems to be angry. He's really mad. He's kind of a selfish character. And you're seeing textual evidence, actual evidence from Joe Smith's own words, thoughts, behaviors, from other characters' responses to him, from narrative comments in this short story that let you know he is angry and selfish. So here's how that very first sentence of your paragraph should look. In the short story, A Day in the Life of Joe Smith by Sam Brown, one may see that Joe Smith is an angry and selfish character. So see, you've done everything you were supposed to do in that very first topic sentence that's like a little mini thesis. You've given us the full title of the work, correctly punctuated in quotation marks. You've given us the full name of the author, and you've told us, you've regurgitated back the answer to the prompt question. You've given us 2 character traits. He's angry, he's selfish. Now, you've got to prove what you've just said in the remainder of that little short paragraph. So the paragraph that you write should contain about 10 to 12 substantial sentences, not little itty-bitty short sentences, but normal-sized substantial sentences, or around 200, 250 words. No one is actually going to count the wording, but you should nevertheless try to adhere to those guidelines for length, because we've been trained to eyeball it and pretty much know. And so not being close to the word count could mean point deduction. So you should have a word count on your computer, a word count tool that you can use that will show you how many words you've written. Be sure you use formal academic language. This is an academic paper, okay? It's short, but it's academic. So don't use first person I or me, or second person you or your or yours, unless part of a quote that you're using, obviously. Instead, use one or ones, right? One may see that Joe Smith is an angry character, not you will see, or I argue that Joe Smith is an angry character. Avoid words that are vague and informal and too conversational, like stuff and thing and people, right? You want to elevate your language. Not adhering to those guidelines will cost you points. So after writing your very first sentence, you should then develop your paragraph with details and analysis, responding directly to that prompt question that's going to be asked of you. So again, while we cannot know yet the exact text or the exact prompt question until the exam happens, I can tell you that many past 1020 exams focus on character, right? So the question prompt may ask you to define two qualities or two characteristics of a certain character, as in the example that I just went through. So you would then need to back up your ideas with actual evidence from the story. Now, alternatively, the prompt question that you get may be about a literary term that we've learned. I have seen that happen sometimes. So, for example, the prompt may ask you to describe the character's moment of epiphany, which, as you will remember from our terminology, the aha moment, where the character realizes just what life is all about or what really matters most to him or her. So, for example, I know that once we were given a short story about a young girl who has to make a choice between being with a boy whom she is very attracted to, or following her own heart and doing what she knows is right and losing him in the process. And so she has an epiphany moment, a moment where it becomes clear to her that she is going to follow her own moral compass, follow her own heart, even if it means losing him, and that's her epiphany moment. Now, the prompt question might also ask you to explain what seems ironic in a text, or something like that. But generally, though, those questions usually concern a character analysis. So what kind of person is this character, and how do we know? And remember, we've said in our unit on fiction, our very first unit in the course, we can think of characters in a fictional piece like real people. They have strengths, they have weaknesses. They're never 100% perfect. They're richly human. So think about real characteristics that we see in real people and how they're manifesting in the character. You have to quote at least once from the text in the body of your paragraph to back up your main idea. And the actual instructions may tell you that you have to quote twice. So you want to really read the instructions and make sure that you're doing what they ask of you. But you can quote more than that if you want. Just make sure that anytime you're quoting with the author's last name and page number in parentheses, you're citing, right? So you have your quote and you have your citation, author's last name and page number. So if the author's last name is Smith and you're using a quote from page 2, here is how your in-text citation would look. The quote, Smith 2, in parentheses, period. The period goes there. And note that page numbers will likely appear within the text you're given. If they do not, just count the pages 1, 2, because there'll be a separation between the pages. And make sure not to drop the quote, because you will get serious point deductions for that. Make sure that there's some wording of your own that incorporates that quote. And the way you know for sure that you've dropped the quote is if it's appearing all by itself as a sentence with no words of yours in the same sentence. So make sure you have some wording of your own in the same sentence with that quote. Otherwise, it's dropped. Now, this is super important. If the works cited information is provided to you on the actual final exam, then you will need to create a separate works cited sheet. So it may be, it may not be, but if it's given to you, you will have to do it. And so remember to place your works cited page on a separate page after you've finished writing your response, and to put the words works cited up at the top in the center of that page. Be sure you're using a hanging indent, which is correct for MLA works cited. That means that you do not indent the first line of an entry, but you do indent the second and any remaining lines. So the indent is hanging, right? You can look at your little Siegel handbook for help there. There's a sample paper at the end of the MLA section. You can look back at sample papers I've given you. Your short paragraph response will be graded according to the English 1020 rubric for final exam assessment paragraph that's found on this same document at the end of it. So adequate means you've made a passing grade, while inadequate means your paragraph failed. And so obviously the more adequate your paragraph is, the higher the grade. So finally, I'm coming to final exam policies, end of semester policies, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken here, that I already reviewed this with you in the other final exam document that I went over in a separate video. But let's be sure, I'm pulling it up to make sure that it is there, and it is. So I don't think there's a need for me to actually go through that again, but read through the final exam policies, end of semester policies on your own. And so finally, I want to express to you how much I've enjoyed having you in my class this semester. I appreciate you hanging in there with me. If I can do anything to be of help to you, please, don't hesitate to email or visit me in my office next semester. If you need a literature class as an elective, I'll either be teaching Modern American Lit or African American Lit in the fall, and I would love to have you in that class. So thank you, and good luck on your final exams.